In this short video, I want to take a look at a fake movement that bears some resemblance to many movements we see today, and discuss why these movements break down. My hope is to put out a Christian philosophy video every few weeks to help people build a positive understanding of God, one another, and of the world. So send me some questions, and I can do my best in future videos to help you break them down. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm starting the movement, and it's called the kindness movement. And what this movement will do is spread kindness all over the world. We have tried for a very long time to do this by other means to no avail, and now the time is up. We must spread kindness at any costs. As such, this movement will consist of kindness warriors going from house to house, burning and pillaging anyone and anything that we deem to be unkind. A person might say, I agree with kindness, but I don't believe that what you are doing is spreading that kindness. This person may see their neighbor's house get burned down and say, I am not for this kindness movement. And you could say to that person, are you saying that you are not for kindness? Well, certainly not, that person would say. I'm absolutely for spreading kindness, but I do not believe that what this movement is doing is spreading that. Are you saying that unkind things should not be stopped and that we must allow those things to remain then? Shall we sit idly by while the innocent are harmed? After all, to be against the kindness movement is to be against kindness itself. And to be against kindness itself makes you part of the problem to be dealt with accordingly by the movement. So you now know that I'm speaking in jest, but the lesson should be clear. In this instance, the means by which the movement spreads becomes more important than the movement itself, because the person who is the kindest is the person who is the least likely to be a part of the kindness movement. Now, perhaps a person that is a part of the kindness movement genuinely does believe that what they are doing is the ultimate way to spread kindness. Are they still kind? Can two people be completely opposed to one another while fighting for the same thing? And to this I say, to all the movements you must have a second aspect, and that aspect is the truth. The truth makes all the difference. It is not enough to be only empathetic. It is not enough to only be kind. You must also be correct in your assessment of what's needed. If you're not correct, you may in fact be spreading the exact opposite of what you intended in many cases. Let's say I work as a spokesperson for an oil company, tasked with regaining public trust after a tanker spill in the ocean. If I step up to the podium and inform the public that the spill was contained quickly and that there is minimal environmental damage, the public trust may be briefly spiked. But suppose I was misinformed, and now images begin to surface of the ongoing devastation of the spill. Now the company is in worse public standing than before I had said anything. Not only were the small gains in public trust lost, now the public is untrusting even if I follow up with statements that are true regarding the matter. This is because setting the movement's sights on trust was not enough. That trust had to be based on truth, or else the cause for trust disappears. Although among the masses typically involved in movements gone awry, there may be a handful of genuine and caring people who have made simple mistakes regarding truth. Among the movement leadership, though, I doubt that there are so many. If it were so, the movement would avail itself of some goal and then disband once it was achieved. But power, once gained, is difficult to give up. Instead, adherence to the movement and its leadership becomes a goal unto itself. Until all adhere, the movement will not be complete. And as such, where once kindness was the goal, now adherence to the movement is the goal. Because after all, to be kind is to be part of the kindness movement, and not to be a part of the movement is to be against it, and thus to be a part of the problem. And to be a part of the problem makes you an unkind person who must be stopped and attacked by any means necessary. Thus the movement now thoroughly captures three kinds of men: the genuine and caring masses who have mistaken the truth; 2, the willfully ignorant and power-hungry leadership; and 3, the coward who simply desires not to be hurt. Among any one of these three, we could have captured the majority of mankind. There are few weaknesses more prevalent within mankind than cowardice and the desire to look righteous without having to give anything up. But now let's add another level of detail. Suppose that those who refuse to take part in the movement encompass two kinds of people as well, both the informed and kind-hearted people, and 2, the actively and unashamedly unkind people. Suppose that that side of the movement encompasses good and bad as well, seen not as an unaffiliated group, but instead a sort of counter-movement which also contains bad actors, further adding nuance to the issue. Now in which camp should we choose to stand? Do you stand with those whose intentions are good, but who have misaligned all efforts in its implementation? Or do you stand with those who are misunderstood, or whose beliefs may even run more counter to your own, although in many cases less prevalently. Here, I think, lies the problem with movements in general. Fealty to a group leaves a man either to feel as though he must defend things with which he is uncomfortable when his group disagrees with his ideals, or else he is to be painted with a brush used to encompass all kinds of malice with which you do not agree either. But after all, what would a world look like in which no movements took place? And here's where I believe we come to the crux of the issue. A society made of groups can only be so complex and only contain so much nuance because there can only be so many groups. But a society formed of individuals is infinitely complex, moving and breathing with every slight nuance that the collective human psyche deserves. But this philosophy, after all, has a name within what was once a movement, called individualism. And so herein lies the problem yet again. A set of beliefs receives a name, and then that name carries along with it baggage. Here, the only route I see then to circumvent this problem is again in the introduction of truth into our use of language itself. We ought to be careful only to call a spade, but to live by such a standard means that we lose many of our weapons of ideological warfare. It is a very effective tool to call somebody a name that carries with it baggage that strikes fear and terror into the hearts of all those who hear it. Call somebody a conservative, and they will neither be offended by your labeling them conservative, nor will others listening see that label as something fearful. But call them a fascist, and though the word by definition is not true of the person you are talking to, those listening will begin to believe that this is a dangerous movement. And so ideological warfare is waged. But we, as Christians, have to fight against this, because at its core, it is both untrue and destructive to the goal of growth. If we are able to correctly and accurately describe what our ideological opponents believe, then we have established the first step necessary to produce in both parties a greater and deeper understanding. Thus ideas flourish, and the best ideas are able to win out. And with this precision, we no longer find the need to confess fealty to a movement. Those who are pro-kindness simply act as such. There is no umbrella of kindness movement versus unkindness movement. There are simply those who have trained themselves and others to act in such a way. And to my original hypothetical movement, made up of those who seek to spread kindness through intimidation and violence, we have a word that applies to their movement as well. It's defined as a person who uses unlawful violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. And that word we would call is a terrorist. We need not mean this as a slight, but we must speak in a way that is truthful. But this begins to feel hopeless, because we might ask, how then can we fix humanity when we see so much progress by movements, and any number of human flaws and misunderstandings can destroy the entire aim of the movement? Put simply, how can humanity ever see above it? We cannot predict the unintended consequences of such a complex thing as a collective human spirit, much less so knowing that we all have different experiences and different understandings even of what the truth is. It is like collectively trying to debug a program, but each person is only given a single line of code. Similarly, it is impossible for a single human to determine the proper function of humanity. It is only by somebody standing above humanity. Someone who is not subject to it must look at it, analyze it, and make the rules for it. And as such, we are only able to lean back on the Word of God. God invented the program, and only He knows how it is intended to function. He dictates the rules, and His rules are as such. The wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. We would be foolish to miss the fact that the miraculous nature of society that is able to heal is entirely reliant on its ability to take a slight on the one cheek and turn back kindness on the other. Now let's interject the truth into one final aspect of our fake movement. Let's suppose that the movement sets out to repair a fundamental flaw in human nature, under the belief, the wrong belief might I mention, that humanity is, at its core, good. And it is only by a maligned outside influence that we end up with this sort of flaw within ourselves. So for this person to look at a fundamental problem in humanity and say that this must be fixable if humanity itself is good, leads only to a greater and greater level of frustration and anger as they continually find themselves utterly powerless to repair what they believe they can. As the kindness movement continues to spread, it searches the world over for examples of unkindness, only to find it in plenty, everywhere. No matter how much they try, no matter what they do, no matter what laws are passed, unkindness persists. It persists throughout the whole system, even to the depths of themselves. In every individual interaction, whether large or small, system, or individual, whether among the monk, the priest, the rabbi, or the professor, they were able to find it, leading them to take greater and greater actions to fight it, only to find themselves feeling more and more angry and powerless, eventually leading them to a hopelessness which can guide them in one of two ways: into a new wisdom, or to lash out in extraordinary new ways. So, what do we do about human depravity? If it is hopeless, is it just saying that we might as well not try? In fact, it is quite the opposite. It is the understanding that human depravity is a fact of life that allows us to accept it, and it is the acceptance of human depravity, knowing that we live in a world that tends not towards peace but towards chaos, that allows us to live freely and kindly even in spite of it. Because we know that fighting against human depravity is a never-ending game. We know that the man left to his own devices does not produce benevolence but evil. And so, to sow even the smallest seed of goodness is a day worth celebrating, although human depravity still exists. And a system which allows the sowing of that seed of kindness, no matter how small, is a good system. Even if that seed is within yourself, it is a day worth celebrating, and it is your own soul that will suffer from the maligned view of human nature in this sense. Although it seems in itself to be a rather hopeless conclusion to believe that the human soul is depraved, it is undoubtedly true. And when we choose to accept and live in truth, we will find ourselves spreading goodness out of it. There is no greater empirically shown conclusion on the face of the earth than the depravity of man. We can see it everywhere. Whether you wish ill for another, it is the depravity of man. Wherever you were dishonest for personal gain, it is the depravity of man. In fact, we are so capable of spotting human depravity that we wield it as a cudgel against anyone we deem to be our opponents. More so now than ever, in the age of cancel culture, we should be becoming aware of this fact. Do you find yourself set against a man? Well, undoubtedly there should be a woman somewhere who has treated her less than ladylike. Is your opponent a woman? Well, certainly she has torn someone down at least once in her life. Do you want to discredit Christianity? Well, then bring up the Crusades. Do you want to discredit atheism? Well, then bring up communist regimes, and so on. Wherever you wish to find human depravity, you may find it. And yet we resist the thought of it, because we know that to accept the depravity of man is to admit that humanity does not hold the keys to its own bright future. And if we do not hold the keys, then we must go looking for the one who does. Thank you guys for listening. I'll see you next time.